You don't have a right to free healthcare because healthcare requires other people's labor, and you don't have a right to other people's labor. You don't have a God-given right to anything that requires other people's labor. Oh, health insurance is so corrupt. They shouldn't be profiting off of people's healthcare needs. Okay, then how should it be done?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we dive into the internet's most heated debates and unpack the reactions. Today, we are talking about a viral TikTok that has the internet divided. A guy shared his controversial take on why he believes no one has the right to free healthcare because, according to him, healthcare requires other people's labor and you don't have a right to someone else's work. Let's break this down.
I see you've been reading your Capitalism for Dummies handbook again. First of all, your argument that you don't have a right to other people's labor, do you think that public schools, roads, or even the military just magically maintain themselves? Or do these things not count because you already benefit from them? Society literally functions because people's labor supports communal needs funded by taxes. It's not exactly a revolutionary idea, it's called being a part of civilization. And saying that people don't have a right to healthcare because it involves labor is peak ignorance. By your logic, I guess we should all just stop calling the fire department when our house is burning down because how dare we infringe upon those brave firefighters' labor? Should we stop expecting police officers to respond to emergencies or for teachers to educate children? You're cherry-picking healthcare because it's profitable under your little free market fantasy. And then there's your mocking of Americans criticizing insurance companies for profiting off other people's healthcare needs. We criticize them because they're profiting off other people's suffering. And when you ask, how should it be done then? Oh, I don't know, maybe look at literally every other developed country that provides universal healthcare. They seem to be managing it just fine without price gouging insulin or making people choose between chemo and paying rent. But please, continue explaining why a system where a CEO's bonus is dependent upon denying someone life-saving care is somehow morally superior. You are so close to discovering that the problem isn't the labor of healthcare workers, it's the exploitation of that labor for profit. Oh, and one last thing. If you ever find yourself in an emergency room needing urgent care, I'd be curious to see how fast you stick to your no right to labor argument when that person's labor is quite literally saving your life.
Comment got taken down 4 times. We need to start tarring and feathering people again.
Who's gonna tell him?
What the fuck happened to caring about other people? What happened to the shared responsibility of taking care of each other and making sure that everyone's basic needs are met? What happened to love and empathy and compassion? They're called taxes. We use them all the time to fund things like infrastructure, education, and in my country, healthcare. What would you say to someone who had to phone the police? Sorry, you'll just have to get robbed at gunpoint because you're not entitled to that policeman's labor. Or you'll just have to get burnt up in that fire because you're not entitled to that fireman's labor. What happened to living in a society where we care for each other? We all contribute to society in a variety of ways and not just through our labor. This isn't about a transaction of labor. This is making sure that everyone has access to care, whether they can afford it or not. That's the kind of world I want to live in, not one where people are dying because they can't afford medications. Capitalism is a parasite that brainwashes us to dehumanize each other, to look at the world through the lens of labor and money, to divide people into people who can work, people who can't, people who have money, people who don't, and then to decide who deserves care based on those attributes. That is not the kind of world that I want to live in, and I don't believe the majority of people do. We have to organize our systems using love, compassion, and empathy. Healthcare should be free for everyone.
Well, Evan, let's start with how it shouldn't be done. Maybe insurance companies shouldn't purposely deny claims just so that they can pocket several $billions a year. And those incentives you speak of, my friend, they come already from the private investors they have when they have these big fancy dinners and they discuss like, hey, Tom, how's those rejection rates going? And he's like, hey, Billy, I'm keeping them right where you like it, my friend. And they're like, good for you. I'm going to give you a $5 million bonus on Christmas. You keep killing those people. And I know you are disappointed in the American people's soulless reaction to the unaliving of the CEO, but if you can just let me cook for a moment, and I promise you'll be full by the end. First of all, there is no correlation, my love, between people getting paid for their labor and a human being having the right to a quality life and being cured on any level of illness by someone who has the expertise and knowledge to do so. There is something called ethics in healthcare. And it's sure as hell ain't ethical to put a business model before patient care. A group of corrupt imbeciles with no medicinal education should not be able to decide if a patient is going to get cured or not. So we've had numerous preventable deaths, preventable terminal illnesses, overcrowded emergency rooms for non-emergent situations. We're happy about the fall of an evil empire.
No, you're absolutely right. We don't have a right to free healthcare. We have a right to healthcare paid for by our government. Yeah, dude, don't be a twat. It's a bad look. And you should be, you really, trust me, healthcare is something I can see you needing at some point because, they gotta fix a broken nose, dude. You're gonna wind up with at least a couple of them. I can already
Okay,
tell.
first, let's start with this core argument. The idea that no one has a right to free healthcare because healthcare requires labor and you don't have a right to someone else's labor. On the surface, this seems like a reasonable point if you frame it within the context of individual rights and freedoms. After all, if someone provides a service, whether it's a doctor, nurse, or other healthcare worker, they should be compensated for their work, right? Nobody wants to be forced into providing labor for free. That is a fair baseline to start with. But here is where his argument starts to unravel for a lot of people. Most Christians aren't arguing that healthcare workers should work for free. They are advocating for a system where healthcare is publicly funded, so workers still get paid, but the financial burden between falls solely on the individual needing care. In other words, the guy's argument ignores how publicly funded systems work in countries with universal healthcare. For example, in Canada, doctors and nurses are compensated, just like they choose between being a doctor and paying rent. The money comes from taxes, and the system, while not perfect, ensure that no one is denied care based on their ability to pay. Now let's move on to another part of his argument that really got people talking. His claim that nothing that requires other people's labor is a God-given right. This raises a larger philosophical question: what is a right? Many people would argue that basic human rights like access to clean water, education, and yes, healthcare are fundamental to a functioning society. The right to healthcare isn't about demanding free labor. It's about recognizing that as a society, we have an obligation to ensure everyone has access to essential services. Think about public education. Teachers work hard, and nobody is suggesting they shouldn't be paid for their labor. But in many countries, including the US, public education is funded by taxes so that every child has access to schooling, regardless of their family's income. Why can't healthcare work the same way? This is a question that keeps coming up in response to his video. If we can collectively fund education, roads and police and fire departments, why is healthcare arguably the most important service of all so different? Another point he made was about the corrupt of health insurance companies and how they profit off people's healthcare needs. Here, I actually think a lot of people would agree with him. Healthcare insurance companies in the US are notorious and for patronizing profit over patient care. They deny claims, raise premiums, and leave millions of people in medical debt. But then he pivots and say, okay, then how should it be done? As if universal healthcare hasn't already been successfully implemented in dozens of countries around the world. This part of his argument came across as distinguished to many viewers because it felt like he was dismissing a solution that already exists. Let's talk about the reactions because this is where things get really interesting. On one side, he had people agreeing with him, saying things like, why should I pay for someone else's healthcare? I work hard for my money. This perspective often comes from a place of individualism, which is deeply ingrained in American culture. The idea is that you should be responsible for yourself and your family, and anything beyond that is seen as unfair. But critics of this mindset argue that it overlooks the interconnectedness of society. When people don't have access to healthcare, it doesn't just affect them, it affects everyone. Diseases spread more easily, productivity decreases, and the overall quality of life in a community suffers. On the other side, you had people absolutely dragging this guy in the comments. One of the most common rebuttals was, if healthcare isn't a right, then what happens when someone can't afford it? Are we just supposed to let them die? This is a real issue in the US where medical debt is a leading cause of bankruptcy, and people often delay or avoid treatment because they can't afford it. Critics argue that a society that lets people suffer or die because they can't pay for healthcare isn't just unfair, it's inhuman. Another interesting reaction was from people pointing out the hypocrisy of his argument. If you don't believe in rights that require other people's labor, then what about firefighters, police officers, or even the military? All of these services rely on labor, and yet most people would agree that they are essential. Why is it acceptable to pool resources for public safety but not for public health? And then there is the international perspective. People from countries with universal healthcare were quick to chime in, saying things like, "This is such an American argument. In my country, we don't have to worry about going bankrupt if we get sick." They highlighted the benefits of universal healthcare systems, like lower administrative costs, better health outcomes, and greater access to care. If it's worth nothing, that's why no system is perfect. Many countries with universal healthcare spend less per capita on healthcare than the US does, while covering everyone. But let's circle back to the deeper issue here, the role of empathy in this debate. A lot of the backlash to this TikTok stems from the perception that it lacks compassion. When you reduce healthcare to a transactional exchange of labor, you lose sight of the fact that we are talking about people's lives. No one chooses to get cancer or be born with a chronic condition. These aren't luxuries or personal feelings, they are part of the human experience. Advocating for a system that ensures everyone gets the care they need isn't about entitlement, it's about recognizing our shared humanity. To wrap this up, I think the TikToker's argument raises important question about the balance between individual rights and collective responsibility, but it's clear from the overwhelming reaction that many people see healthcare as a basic necessity, not a privilege. The debate isn't just about economics or politics, it's about what kind of society we want to be. Do we patronize profits over people, or do we work together to ensure that everyone has a chance to live a healthy, fulfilling life? That is the real question, and is one we are going to be grappling with for a long time. Thank you for watching, and let's continue this conversation in the comments below. Let us share our thoughts and perspectives with one another. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on this story and more. I will see you in the next video.